Okay.
Hmm?
We're recording, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Elliot, I wanted to thank you for being a part of this again.
Oh, thank you.
Always fun having you on board as a guest for any convention or anything related to convention stuff
Great.
like this. If you would let us know how you started in with what got you liking Superman
But
and
got,
being a part
I guess
of working with DC.
I guess the George Reeves TV show. I learned how to read in a barber shop up the block from where I lived. Andy's barber shop in Brooklyn, and he had a table full of comic books, and I learned how to read with his Superman comics. So I guess I was reading when I was 4, and that's what I was reading. So that's what got me to like it. It's kind of been part of my whole thought process ever since. Hey, you there, Ken?
We're having trouble hearing y'all off and on.
Oh,
I don't know if it's on your end or mine. You're coming in and out on your stuff.
am I? Well,
I can hear you now.
I can hear him.
You can hear
I
me
can hear
okay?
him pretty well.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
can hear
okay.
him pretty good.
Yeah, I was hearing
Yeah.
him pretty well.
Kenny, I think we're getting lag at your end.
My end or his end?
Oh, your end. You were kind of fading in and out. And what I was hearing, you were the one fading in and out a little bit.
Okay,
yeah, your video's gone for me.
I'm
But
trying to do this from a smartphone. Let me see what I can do here.
how's it been going for everybody else?
Going pretty well. It's been a good weekend so far.
Yeah.
Like I said, we've had some great guests like yourself. The panels have been going really good. Elliot, I was going to say, while Kenny's doing that, I can step in and ask a few questions if you don't mind. Wonderful.
Sure.
I was going to ask, growing up as a kid yourself, and getting into the business, what was it that made you want to do DC as opposed to Marvel? Or did you want to, was there ever any thought about ever going to Marvel?
Oh, Marvel? Yeah. I mean, I read the comics when I was a kid, but I was always a Superman fan.
Can anybody see me now?
I just had the whole DC universe kicking around my head my whole life, pretty much. So.
Well, I was going to say, that's the first question I always ask comic book collectors: are you a DC fan or a Marvel fan? And
yeah,
if you're a DC fan, then we're going to be friends for life. If you're a Marvel fan, I'll learn to love you. So, well, I'll turn it back over to Kenny now. Okay. Thanks, Elliot.
Yeah.
Can everybody see me? Can you hear me?
Now we can hear you.
Yeah, we got you.
Okay. Can you see me? I'm having trouble with myself on this phone. Anyway, question was
Should I tell stories?
how
I can't
you
hear you now.
became a fan and stuff like that. Can't hear me? Hold on, let me
kinda
fix this
hear-
again.
It keeps
You're fading
cutting
out
in and
yeah.
out.
Yeah.
Yep.
Want to hear a good Stan Lee story?
Certainly.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do it.
I did a bunch of Marvel scripts, not a lot, but some. And it was always when I was having a fight with Julie.
Huh?
I think the first time I ever had a real conversation with Stan, I called him up in the middle of a fight with Julie, and I said, I'm having a big fight with my editor. Can I come see you at your office like a grown up? Because we were grown-ups then.
Yeah.
And he said, sure. So I went over his office and I said, I need 4 books a month. He says, you can have 1. I said, really? He says, yeah. I said, okay. He said, how about a Spider-Man? I said, great. So he brings me downstairs to Jerry Conway's office. At the time, Jerry was the editor, I think. And he said, you know, Elliot? And Jerry says, sure. He was at my house last week. I said, great. Give him a book to write. And then that Peter Parker book, that new one.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Spectacular Spider-Man. Yeah.
yeah. So that's how I got to know Stan. He was just being a guy who was living by his creed. You know, he was the guy who taught us that power and responsibility are both sides of the same coin, or something like that. I'm paraphrasing. But he had no reason to do that. I mean, I didn't really know him very well, and I just said, I'm in trouble. He said, okay, I'll fix it. And he gave me a Spider-Man book. By the time I was done with the Spider-Man book, I made up with Julie. So every time I had a fight with Julie, which was pretty often, you know, they went on for more than a week, I'd go over there and they'd give me work.
I was going to say, it looks like we've lost Kenny. If you, Elliot, if you don't mind, I'll be happy to step in and finish.
Step in all you like, please.
Awesome. Well, I'm curious. What did you and Julie fight about?
Oh, I think being Jewish kids growing up in Brooklyn and the Bronx. I think that was mostly what we fought about. Character issues, territory, punctuation. We fought about everything we could. I mean, we were very good friends. Like the whole time we knew each other, which is for the rest of his life. But we were just two street kids from the same place, and we just fought about whatever brothers fight about. And he was older and more powerful, and so he always he got to stay in the office, and I got to go home and get work from Marvel. We didn't fight about much of anything, just everything. I mean, our plotting sessions were really loud and required closed doors, and people would pull chairs over to the door and listen because we were yelling all the time. So that was our relationship, I guess.
Well, the yelling can be good if you're doing like, and then Superman comes down and Luthor does this, and it's going to be like that, and it's going to be like this, and they're going to be, Metropolis is blown up and everything, and then they're going to move to Gotham City and destroy that town too. Like that,
Yeah.
that would be a good thing, but.
Yeah, well, I think the biggest argument we ever had was about was this story I wrote that I eventually took my name off of because he wanted to make a point about the authority of editors, and I wanted to make a point about the people's right to know. I had just finished journalism school, I think, and it was a story about Perry White's background, and it was based on an idea Julie had. Apparently in the 40s, a friend of his had written a story about the development of the atomic bomb. This is during World War II. And he got a visit from the FBI over it because it was a project in progress, and they wanted to know how he knew about it. And he didn't know about it. He just made it up. But he had to sit on the story, and that was the story that I wrote, the story of how Perry had discovered the Manhattan Project in the process of winning World War II. And my point was that at the end, they should publish it. And Julie's was, no, you can't publish it because the editor said not to. And that was what the fight was about. It was about philosophy and how the story should end. And I thought it made no sense. The ending made no sense. So I actually went in the production room and I blanked out my name from the credits with India ink. That was good for 2 months worth of Marvel work. That's
Wow.
where that came from.
Well, I was going to say, you were part of that new generation that came in during the 70s. I know Julie had writers he had worked with before, and then you, Carrie Bates, were some of the new guys that were coming in and everything. Do you think
Mike Friedrich was one of those.
Yeah. Do you think, well, of course, too, I think when you were coming in, that was around the same time as it was around the same time as Watergate and all, too. So
Yeah.
there was that big question of, the role of reporters in society and keeping check on the government and all. So, and
I tried really hard not to be relevant. I just wanted to tell stories, and they all, everything was a reflection of the period and what was going on in the universe. Yeah. I
Well,
was in journalism school at the time of Watergate, and I was writing Superman at the same time. So I guess it all came out in there.
we had a comment from Kelly, our co-host, that it's a very interesting insight, and it sounds like a very important argument to have.
Whatever came after Kelly, our co-host, I don't hear.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, Kelly, our co-host, commented that sounded like a very important argument to have, and something that's very relevant as far as, truth, justice, and the American way.
Yeah.
People to know. So.
Yeah, what's the American way? I mean, I think it's it's an aspiration, I guess.
It is.
Yeah.
Well, I've always thought, regardless of what you think of the American way is, I always thought Superman is reflective of it. It's what America needs to be at that time. I think people look to that and look for it to be Superman as being what the American way is.
Yeah, this 35-year-old Superman, he's the guy at the beginning of his life. I mean, he's the guy at the beginning of his career. Who knows where he's going to be 100 years from now? But at the moment, he's living Metropolis, working on Earth. He's growing. He's growing up. He's trying to figure out who he is constantly. He's a young guy. I think I identified with all the characters I wrote really closely, except for Superman. I always thought of him as a kind of a father figure. Now I think of him as grandson figure, because he's like the country. He's trying to figure out where he is, what he's going to be, where he's going.
Actually, got Kelly online. Who am I thought you might want to join in. You have some very good questions. Kelly had a great question about you yourself. What do you think the American way is?
Me?
Mm-hmm.
Jeez.
Small question.
You put him on the spot, Kelly.
Yeah. I used to be a Jefferson. Sorry?
What do you think it should be?
Well, it is what it should be. It's an aspiration. It's certainly not the way we are or ever have been. I mean, we started a country that said all men are created equal, and that immediately leaves out women, and only people with property could vote. So that left out 94% of the rest of the population. 6% of the people who voted in the election or were eligible to vote for the election of Washington were eligible voters. I mean, 6% of the population. That's what we thought of as democracy 250 years ago. And what we were moving toward was the real life version of what Jefferson wrote in the Declaration of Independence. That's the American way, the thing we haven't gotten to yet. So, I mean, I when I was a kid, I was a big Jefferson fan. I always used to say my favorite guy in history was Thomas Jefferson, until a friend pointed out to me that, well, this is the guy who enslaved the children he had by the teenagers he raped. So there are shortcomings to a guy like that. But you can't, that doesn't diminish the stuff he wrote down, the stuff he said, the stuff he told us we should stand for. That's the American way, what we want to stand for. That's all. Is that an answer? I don't know. I hope so.
Well, I remember reading a very good.
That is a beautiful answer.
Thank you.
Well, I was going to say, I remember reading a great point that someone had made about the problematic nature of the founding fathers, and that if you were to judge them by today's standards, they fall short. But if you judge them by the standards of their time, they were very progressive. You don't think about slave owners being progressive, but the concept of forming what became the United States, the foundation for democracy, it's kind of one of those things where I think people take for granted what we have, And there are people all over the world that look to America, and that's the high bar. That's their dream, is to have what we have, the freedom to be able to speak our minds, to
Until lately.
thoughts. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I used to say stuff like that. I used to say, well, judging them by the standards of their times, blah, 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 blah. I don't buy that anymore. I don't think there are standards of their times. I think what we should aspire to is to live by the standards of whatever the standards are in the future, you know?
Right.
I think we'll be very lucky if our grandchildren and great-grandchildren look back on us and see our shortcomings. I think that's an indication that we raised our kids right.
Yeah.
I love what Joel said in the chat. He said Marianne Williamson said that we don't celebrate their forefathers, but only their ideals.
Yeah.
I really like that. I think Superman, kind of bringing this back to Superman, but I think Superman embodies ideals.
Yeah.
And I think he really personifies that ideal of the American way. And I think as you understand the American way and as you explained it, you wrote him really well in personifying that. So thank you for that.
Thanks for liking it. Yeah. There was a guy, Benjamin Franklin is my new favorite founding father, and there were all sorts of shortcomings he had. But there was this guy he knew who had a donkey. This was his property. And he was a guy from Philadelphia, and he was in his 40s or 50s or so, and he had this donkey. And owning the donkey made him eligible to vote. And Franklin said, what if the donkey died and this guy were then 70? Well, he's been voting since he was 40, but because he no longer had property, he wasn't eligible to vote anymore. It didn't make any sense to him. It doesn't make any sense to me. So that's a nice thought. That's all.
It is. Very nice.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
American way. I like it. What was that?
Oh, we're getting a little bit of feedback, I think.
Yeah, from somewhere.
Yeah.
Did you catch much of what I said?
I did, yeah. I did. Well, like I said, with me, I'll be the first to admit I'm kind of an idealist. I always believe try to hope for the best. You're going to stumble, but the idea is to pick yourself up, keep moving forward, and just don't stop believing that things can be the best that they can be.
Yeah.
Again, I'm like I said, I'm kind of a wide-eyed optimist in that regard. My mom always used to tell me it was going to get me in trouble one of these days, but no, I just
isn't that the idea?
Yeah, you have to have faith, you have to have hope. And again, that's for me, that's what Superman was always about. Superman was always about, it isn't being the strongest person, it isn't about being the most powerful person in the room, it's about being the most compassionate, the most sympathetic, the one who's willing to go above and beyond even when you're not asked to.
Yeah.
That's just me.
I got a daughter who's very assertive. She's 29 now, and when she was a kid, I used to always say, these qualities will serve you very well as an adult, don't use them on me. Now she's a 5th grade teacher, and I think she's the only one in the school who keeps her class well ordered and well oiled and learning something now that they're teaching everything online. Yeah. She's a Zoom teacher these days.
Bless her.
Yeah, so my father used to say the same thing to me. He said, you know, one of these days you're going to get the shit beat out of you. I never did. He says, don't talk to people like that. I said, okay, I'll stop. But I don't know. Never got the shit beat out of me. I got pushed around a little, but never really lost. I had superpowers. It was something in destiny. When I ran for Congress. Remember, I ran for Congress. It was
Yeah.
before most of you were born. I was 33, and when people used to ask me what qualified a freelance comic book writer as a congressman, I used to say, well, for the last 10 years or so, I've been in charge of the moral and ethical growth of a generation of American kids.
Yeah.
And that's what I ran on. I mean, you know, I was pretty well educated, and politics was something I always wanted to do. But that was my first foray into it, and pretty much my last, other than helping other people. But that was my rationale. That writing Superman made me qualified as a congressman. I think it does.
Actually,
I feel like you're more.
Huh?
I feel like you're more qualified than some people.
Well, I was watching Meet the Press this morning, and there was somebody came on, and some young congressman or something, and I'm thinking, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. Has he ever read the Constitution? It occurred to me that he probably hadn't, so I fast forwarded ahead.
Actually, I would think writing about ethics, writing about good versus
Yes.
evil, that you're thinking about the big issues that I think everyone who serves in public office should think about. Or something, and I'm the kind of guy that says everybody.
Yeah, you would think.
Yeah.
Agreed.
I don't know.
I think everybody who comes in office should be made to sit down and watch Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, but that's
Yeah.
that's me. But no, I mean, you at least given some thought about the big issues. You thought about what makes right, what makes wrong. And I'll be honest with you, I try not to get political, but I'll be honest, I don't see that going on almost anywhere in politics these days. It seems like nobody is out there trying to fight the good fight. Everybody's trying to get what's theirs, and
No, it's all about coalitions now.
everybody else. Yeah.
It's all about, who wins this vote and who holds that power.
Yeah.
And if you're losing the fight, you talk about unity, and if you're winning the fight, you talk about what comes next. But if you think about what Lincoln said about a house divided will not stand, he wasn't talking about unifying and unity and togetherness. He was talking about somebody has to win. Somebody has to win this fight.
Yeah.
Superman's a character that always wins the fight, but mostly because he's got the most power. I think if I were going to create a character now, I'd try to make his powers grow as a result of winning. You to win all the time. You know what I mean? That's just a concept. I don't know where I'm going with it. Well,
I was gonna say, Elliot, you froze up for just a second or two. Maybe just oh, you kind of froze up there for a second or two.
I was rambling.
Oh no, the screen froze. No, you're fine.
I was talking about a character whose power grows because he takes the right side.
Yeah.
Just as a concept, and what happened was, because I was rambling in my head, my power was diminishing, so I froze up.
No problem.
That's what happened.
I would read that, Elliot. I hope you write it.
Where'd Kenny go? Is he here? No.
Kenny had a bad connection, I think.
I guess he's in.
Last time message I got was
me.
turning over to us, so.
Yeah. What else we got?
I brought Kelly in the tag team, so.
Right.
Kelly, you have any thoughts, any ideas, or any questions?
Where'd she go?
I think we lost Kelly too.
No, the box is there, but I don't hear her.
Yeah, Ellie, I apologize. She's much better to look at than I am, so you're gonna.
She said she'd be right back.
Good.
Yeah. Well, like I said, you have to look at my ugly mug, so I apologize for that. Well, let me ask. Some of your favorite Superman stories. What were some of the favorite ones that you did yourself that you created, or what were some of the story ideas that you did that you feel like you added to the Superman mythos?
Well, my favorite was number 400. It was the one, Superman 400. It was, okay, the concept was looking back at the current day from the point of view of various periods in the future's history. Like, who was Superman? And I did a whole string of stories. Julie wanted to get a bunch of artists in who hadn't worked on the character before.
Right.
So I did a string of, 4 to 8 page stories in a big giant book that were each illustrated by somebody who'd never drawn Superman. One of my favorites was one that Al Williamson drew.
I remember that. That was a gorgeous.
Wasn't that beautiful? I gave him a 6-page script and he says, I can't fit it into 6 pages. I'm going to write it. I'm going to draw it as an 8-page story. I said, great, another 2 pages for me, without doing the work. But it took place on the moon in a lunar colony. That was my idea of what lunar colony should look like. Is a bunch of domes connected together with tubes, and you could only navigate by horse and buggy because internal combustion and electricity would cause too much waste material. I suppose there were a lot of people cleaning up after the horses and the buggies and so forth, but I didn't deal with that. But it was a story about a guy who claimed to have seen Superman long after he had disappeared. My whole idea was that Superman would just go somewhere else, off Earth, or pursue his career elsewhere. But we never killed him off. And when they did kill him off, I thought that was a mistake. But that's another thing.
I was going to say, I love that particular issue because I grew up in the 80s. I was born in 70. I grew up in the 80s. And I always tell people what I love about the 80s is it was one of the last great decades where you had this great crossroads of new comic book creators coming in. But going from the Golden Age and the Silver Age, like Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko, they were still contributing. It was this wonderful influx of creativity. Oh, I'm sorry. I said there was this wonderful influx of creativity, and I think the Superman issue personified that better than anything else. Because, like I said, you had Al Williamson doing that story. You had Frank Miller doing a story.
Yeah.
You had pen-ups by Steve Ditko, Will Eisner, Jack Davis, and Jerry Robinson, and Howard Chaykin cover. And I remember buying that. Howard Chaykin.
Yeah, I love that cover.
Yeah. And again, I bought that, and I'm like, how can this only cost like $1.50? I think it should be costing a lot more. I'm not going to complain, but it should be because it's a masterpiece. It really is.
Well,
It's great. The stories are fantastic. The artwork is beautiful, and I think that was like Julia Schwartz's.
I did a lot of editing on that story.
What's that?
I did a lot of the editing on that story. Julie had some family issues going on.
Really,
So
I didn't know that.
I got to hang out on the phone with the artist a lot.
What kind of interaction did you have? You mentioned Al. I'd love to hear about your interaction with Al Williamson.
Oh, just that I wrote all these scripts without any idea of who was going to get each one.
Mm-hmm.
And Julie kind of distributed them. But he was out a lot. Julie was out a lot during that month or so when we were putting it together. So I got a lot of phone calls from artists. Like Al called up to tell me he wanted 2 extra pages. And I kind of made an executive decision. I said, take 2 extra pages.
Well, it's Al Williamson. How do you say no to Al Williamson? I'd be like, take the whole book, take 20 if you want.
Kaluta, just to talk to Kaluta.
Yeah.
Because I hadn't seen him in a while.
Did you get a chance to talk to like Ditko and Eisner?
I never met Ditko. I got something from him on that book. I never actually met him in person. I think I talked to him on the phone once. But I think there was only one story other than that I wrote that he had drawn.
I was going to say, Tom DeFalco told me the story about meeting Steve over the phone. And he said it was one of the best conversations they ever had.
He's a very bright guy.
Yeah. Well, he said that he got the call. He said he did a Machine Man script, and it's back in the day when he was still putting his name and address and phone number on the cover sheet.
Yeah.
He said he got a call, and he said the voice at the other end says, "I'm calling for Thomas. Are you Thomas?"
Yeah.
And he said, "Yeah, this is Tom DeFalco. What you want?" And he's like, "Thomas, I want to know, what makes a superhero? Because why do you think you're qualified to write about heroes?" Tom thought it was somebody from the Marvel office jerking his chain and says, "Who is this? What's going on?" He says, I'm Steve Ditko, and I'm looking at your Machine Man script, and before I draw it, I want to know, what
Did
do
he
you think
know?
makes a hero?"
Yeah.
It was just
That sounds like a conversation I would have wanted to have.
yeah. Well, it was funny
That's
because
very cool.
well, it's funny. I never got a chance to even talk to Ditko on the phone, and I interviewed Tom and Nacina the same week for a piece for Back Issue, and Nacina was talking about just having these wonderful conversations back and forth. She's like extreme left. Steve, of course, was extreme right, and just this wonderful give and take they had. It's like every point she had, he had a counterpoint, and it was back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and yeah, again, just being able to say you wrote something or had a hand in something that Ditko had a piece of, that's phenomenal.
Yeah.
And again, that entire issue, gorgeous. If you are a Superman fan or a comics fan, I recommend Superman number 400. You've got to own that issue. It's one of the best of the 1980s, I think.
I gave a copy of that to Jerry Seinfeld.
Really?
I ran into him in a
Oh,
restaurant.
wow.
Huh?
I said, oh, wow.
Yeah. I mean, because I knew he was a Superman fan. So I ran into him in a restaurant and I stopped him and I said, "I heard you liked it." And I happened to have a copy with me. So I pulled it out of my briefcase and gave it to him.
Wow.
And then, I kept hanging out in that restaurant because I thought I might run into him again. I did about 2 weeks later. And I said, "Hey, Jerry, did you read my story?" He said, "Well, I've been kind of busy,"
Oh.
which is what you expect from Jerry Seinfeld, right?
But I gotta ask, when he said he didn't read your comic, did you go, "No, so for you, no, so for you"?
Yeah. I would have bought him dinner, but no, he just wasn't interested.
I remember DC put out a litho set of the art from that story, and I was in my comic book store, and I saw it's in a folder, and you open it up, and it has a whole bunch of black and white, non-colored litho prints from that particular issue. It's somewhere here in my apartment. I have no idea where it is at the moment.
I didn't know they did that. When was it?
Yeah, it was probably
when was
like.
That? You know?
I'm going to say probably 84 or so. It was like way back
the book came out in the 80s.
Yeah, it was in the 80s. I forget, like the mid to late 80s.
Would have been nice if they'd sent me one.
Yeah.
Every once in a while I call them up. They reprint something I wrote. And they're supposed to send me copies of everything that they reprint. Sometimes they don't. So it's an excuse to call my friend over there and say what's going on. And the phone call is always good for a pile of comic books. So that's good. I got this one guy at DC. I was pissed at them for a while about something. And I told him, okay, from now on, whenever anybody wants to get a hold of me from DC, you're the guy who calls. So, so he calls me the next day, says, "Okay, from now on, I'm your DC guy. This is an official notification." I said, "Great." And he was just this peon at the time. I think he was an assistant editor. Now he's a vice president. That's pretty cool.
I was gonna say, the way things are going at DC nowadays, you could end up running the company. You could end up getting coffee one morning and end up being president by the end of the day. The way it's going.
Yeah, it's kind of weird.
Kind of sad too, but that's comics today, unfortunately.
I was on crutches. I had a broken leg a couple of years ago, and this was around the time Len died. So I went to the funeral on crutches. Who was the girl who used to run the company? Oh, geez, at that time.
Oh, Jeanette Kahn?
I can't remember her name. But we're standing outside by the grave, and everybody's in a shitty mood because we lost Len. And and Evanier pulls her over to me and says, "This is Elliot Maggin. He wrote Superman for a long time." She says, "Oh, really?" And I said, "Yeah, read the history now that you're part of it." I was really snappish. And my friend, who's now a vice president of the company, grabbed her and took her aside and said, "Oh yeah, he's all right. He's on crutches. Leave him alone."
I was going to say, you have had an opportunity to interact with a lot of history. A lot of guys, like I said, that were still in the industry who helped to found it, and then a lot of guys who came in to help to redefine it, like Lynn.
Yeah.
I was going to say, how much interaction do you have with folks that you worked with today? I mean, are you still in touch with them?
Not much, although that was just Ken Penders who called. You know him?
I've heard the name. I'm trying to place it.
Yeah, he did Star Trek for a while. He's an artist. He's a really good artist. He's good at caricatures. Terrific.
Okay.
But Larry Houston and I are the bubble we have. We're the bubble for this quarantine period. We get together once a week. We promise not to interact with anybody as long as we can get together and have pizza once a week.
That's good.
So that's how much I'm in touch with people I used to work with. I talk to Carrie once in a while. Nobody else talks to Carrie. I'm the only one.
I've talked to him a few times by email for back issue. I tried to get him for the show,
Yeah.
but I don't know if he's interested in doing cons at all nowadays.
Yeah, he's not. He doesn't want to. And I don't know why. I mean, like, people would be thrilled to hear from him.
Yeah.
I keep telling him that.
Well,
He just doesn't want to do it. I don't know why.
Well, the thing
I guess
is,
it's not fun for him. I don't know.
Well, the thing is, I was a Flash fan as a kid.
Who else do I see? I see a bunch of people all the time.
I mean, I grew up on his Flash stories, and they were wonderful. Plus, too, I mean, like I said, besides you, he was one of my Superman art.
Yeah, we used to collaborate on a lot of stuff. He used to live around the corner from me, and we would do stories together where he would actually give me pages of scene descriptions with space, and I would put them in a typewriter and write dialogue on the same sheets of paper. It was a lot of fun.
Well, speaking of the Superman comics that you did, how much interaction did you have with the artist on the books, like Kurt Swan?
We made friends. I think in the 15th year I was doing the book. There was a management book out at the time. It was a management Bible. It was by a guy named, I think, Peter Fuller, and it was an awful philosophy. The idea was, and Paul Levitz used to have it on his bookshelf, Management by Peter Fuller. And his essential philosophy was divide and conquer. Keep all the people working with you at each other's throats, so they don't overthrow you somehow. So Julie used to take that to heart. He used to tell Kurt everything was my fault. You know, if there was something in a story or something they were doing that wasn't to Kurt's liking, oh, it was Maggin's fault. Maggin made me do that. Like I made him do anything, right? So Kurt was pissed at me for like 12 years. And we went to a convention. I went with Julie to a convention in Ithaca, where Cornell is, and Kurt was there. And Sunday morning, he walks over to me about 11 o'clock in the morning. Kurt does, and he says, "Young man, can I interest you in a libation?" He actually used to talk like that. He talked funny. He was very old world, very portly. I said, "Sure, let's have a libation." So we went in it was in a hotel. So we went in the restaurant, and I had vodka, which I don't even like anymore. And he had a martini, and we had breakfast. And there was a girl in there playing the harp. In the middle of the room, there was this girl with a harp, and it was just so unusual. Harp. And we talked a lot about politics and about Julie and about Superman. And we realized how much we had in common. And we had been working together for, who knows how many years, and we were about to not be anymore. But we made friends. Before that, Julie would make me go get him some bean soup whenever Kurt was coming in. He didn't want us to be friends. And after that, the three of us were friends. I remember complaining about it in a panel that the three of us were on. And Julie said, yeah, I did that. I did that on purpose. I don't know what I was thinking. But he was a great guy. And I didn't know that until I'd known him for 12, 15 years already.
I think that was the Mort Weisinger approach, because I always heard horror stories about how Mort would keep his writers at each other's throats by the stories I understood it was you'd have Jerry Siegel come in, he'd get berated
what?
about why he couldn't write as well as Edmund Hamilton, and
I
Edmund
lost you,
Hamilton
man.
would come in and
You're talking about
talk about why he couldn't do
Mort was an exponent of that philosophy, I understand. Carrie used to work with him a lot.
Yeah.
I only met Mort on the phone. Is anybody talking to me because you're all frozen?
I'm
here.
We can hear you. We lost your picture, I think.
I see his picture.
You do, good.
I do.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
We can hear you now. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say we're actually at the 2:55 mark, and we've got a panel coming up at 3. So,
Okay.
but Elliot, we appreciate you joining us. I'm sorry about the technical issues before and everything, but I think we had a nice little conversation towards the end there. I appreciate it.
Thank you. You're recording this?
Yes.
Every once in a while, I find one of these panels on online, and I like watching it again. So.
Oh, definitely. Well, we'll be posting. Kelly will be posting it to YouTube probably in a few days. So
Great.
Go get me a brush real quick. I'll fix your hair.